She didn't scream. She didn't confront anyone. She put the phone back in the coat pocket, went downstairs, and finished making dinner. She served him first. That's the kind of woman Miriam Okafor was. The kind who measures twice before she cuts. The kind who built a catering company from a borrowed pot and a church contract into 27 employees, and a hotel deal worth more than everything she'd started with combined. And the kind who, when she found proof that her husband and her own sister had been stealing from her business for nearly 2 years, did not flinch. She documented. She verified. She waited. And then, on a Tuesday morning in a conference room she had built with her own hands, she let them find out exactly how much she had seen. This is her story. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And subscribe, because what's coming next week is something you are not going to want to miss. Miriam Okafor was 44 years old, and until the evening she reached into her husband's coat pocket to do him a kindness. She had spent 16 years believing she was building something that belonged to all of them. She had opened her first business account with $340 and a cashier's check she'd had to ask the teller to explain twice. She had learned to read a commercial lease by reading 4 of them wrong first. She had fired her first employee on a Tuesday and cried about it in her car, and then gone back inside and finished the shift herself because the Henderson repast was in 3 hours and 60 people needed to eat. She did not fall apart. She never had. That was not a boast. It was simply the architecture of her life, built the same way she built everything else. One decision at a time, with both hands, without waiting for conditions to become ideal. The commercial kitchen on Delaney Street was the physical proof of that architecture. 27 employees. 3 refrigerated vans. A hospital network account that renewed every year without negotiation because the food was that good, and the operation was that reliable. A hotel group proposal sitting on her desk that could change the scale of everything she had made. Her husband Raymond managed vendor relationships and procurement. Her younger sister Claudette handled client communications and scheduling. Miriam ran everything else. The way she always had. The winter coat was charcoal gray. Raymond hadn't worn it since February. She had pulled it from the back of the closet because the temperature had dropped and she was doing him a kindness, the way she was always doing him kindnesses, without announcement, without requiring acknowledgement. The phone was in the breast pocket. It lit up when she picked it up. The lock screen notification was sitting right there, unhidden, because Raymond had never imagined she would be in that coat. Claudette's name. A single line of text. She read it once. She read it completely. She stood in the closet in the thin light, and let it become real the way you let a diagnosis become real. Not all at once, but in the specific, sequential way that understanding actually moves through a person. Then she put the phone back in the pocket. She hung the coat up. She smoothed the front panel flat. She closed the closet door. She went downstairs. She finished making the jollof rice she had on the stove. She plated it carefully, the way her mother had taught her. The way that communicated care even when care was the last thing she felt. She set the table. She called Raymond down for dinner. He came into the kitchen with the easy energy of a man who believed his evening was entirely ordinary. He washed his hands. He sat down. He told her about a procurement call that had run long. She asked a follow-up question. She served him first. She ate everything on her plate. That night, lying in the dark beside a man she had just understood completely for the first time in years, Miriam Okafor made a decision. Not about what to do. She already knew what to do. She decided what kind of woman she was going to be while she did it. The commercial kitchen on Delaney Street smelled like possibility at 5 in the morning. That was the only word she had ever found for it. Before the staff arrived, before the deliveries, before the full noise of an operation running at capacity, there was this hour when the space belonged entirely to what it could become that day. She had felt it the first morning she unlocked the door with her own key. She had stood in the empty kitchen and breathed it in and thought, this is real. This is actually real. And then she had put on her apron and started the prep work, because real things require maintenance. She moved through the temperature logs with the muscle memory of someone who has performed the same check 10,000 times, and still does it carefully every single time. Because the one time you stop doing it carefully is the time it matters. She cross-referenced the delivery manifest against the morning's event schedule. She caught a discrepancy in a linen order for Thursday's corporate breakfast and sent a correction to the vendor before 5:30. Above the filing cabinet in her office, in a frame she had chosen and mounted herself with a level, was a photograph of her mother, standing in the original church kitchen, arms crossed, wearing the green apron with the faded hem. Not smiling. Looking at the camera the way her mother looked at everything that required her full attention. Completely without apology. Miriam had hung it the week the business moved into the Delaney Street space. She had driven the nail herself. She had mounted it at eye level so she would have to look at it directly, not glance up at it. There was a difference, her mother had always said, between looking at something and seeing it. Raymond arrived at 9:15 with coffee he had purchased for himself. He leaned in the office doorway with the comfortable ease of a man who had decided his presence was its own form of contribution. He asked about the Harmon event. She told him it was handled. He asked about the hotel group. She told him Thursday. He nodded and made a sound of approval that cost him nothing. I need the Delaney vendor invoices reconciled before end of week, she said. I'll get to it. She looked up at him then. Just briefly. The calibrated look of a woman who is now measuring everything. By Thursday, she said. He said he would. He left. He would not get to it by Thursday. She had known that when she said it. She said it anyway, because she was building a record now. Every instance. Every pattern. Set aside and documented for when she needed it. Claudette arrived the way she always arrived. 10 minutes past 9, tote bag on one shoulder, already talking before the door was fully open. She had a story about the parking situation on Delaney Street that she delivered to the kitchen staff with the practiced timing of someone who had identified her own charm and decided to deploy it as a primary professional tool. She was genuinely funny. That had always been the complicated part. Claudette was genuinely funny and genuinely warm and genuinely talented at the visible, human-facing dimensions of the work. She remembered that the school district contact had a son with a peanut allergy, and she flagged it every time without being asked. She had driven across town on a Saturday to drop a meal off for a client whose father had passed, and she had not mentioned it to Miriam until 3 weeks later, and only because it came up. She was not a careless person who had stumbled into something wrong. She was a person Miriam had loved completely who had made a deliberate series of choices that required sustained effort and sustained silence to maintain. That was the part that sent Miriam to the quiet place. Not the betrayal itself, but the architecture of it. The patience it had required. The mornings Claudette had walked into this kitchen and laughed at the parking situation on Delaney Street and asked if Miriam had eaten yet. While the transfers were running in the background, Claudette knocked on the open office door frame. Morning, sis. Morning. Miriam did not look up from the binder. You eat? I brought those chin-chin from Auntie Beau's. I've fine. A pause. Half a second. The pause of a person reading a room and deciding the reading was acceptable. Then Claudette's voice picked back up down the hallway, warm and easy. Miriam pressed her fingertips flat against the page. She had taught Claudette how to run a client intake call. She had sat beside her for the first 4 and let her lead the 5th alone. She had given her a title and a salary and a profit-sharing stake in year 3, because she had wanted her sister to have something that was hers inside something that was theirs. She turned the page. She kept working. The monitoring software went in on a Saturday morning. Raymond was supposedly helping a friend move storage units across town. The reason had enough ordinary texture to be plausible and enough vagueness to be nothing. Miriam had stopped filtering his explanations for likelihood. She was filtering them for evidence now. She had built the company's network infrastructure herself 6 years ago when their previous system became inadequate. She held the administrative credentials. She had always held them. She sat at the desk in the back office with the door closed and worked through the setup with the systematic patience of a woman who checks everything twice, not because she doubts herself, but because twice is the correct number of times to check something that matters. Keystroke logs on the shared terminals. File access timestamps across all procurement accounts. Email mirroring on the vendor correspondence Raymond managed. She tested each component. She verified each connection. She closed the interface. Then she drove to Delaney Street and spent 4 hours on the hotel group proposal because the timeline had not paused for any of this, and she had not asked it to. She worked until 6. She locked up. She drove home and had dinner ready before Raymond came through the door. She asked him whether his friend's storage unit was a good size. He said it was fine. She served him first. 3 weeks passed in the careful rhythm of a woman who has decided that nothing changes until she decides it changes. She was professional with Raymond. She was warm with Claudette in the specific, calibrated way of someone who understands that the performance of normalcy is itself a form of discipline. She ran 2 major corporate events. She finalized 2/3 of the hotel proposal. She hired an assistant manager she had been considering for months, a young woman named Priya, who had been quietly overqualified for the position she'd applied for, and would not remain so for long. She was present for all of it, completely, without distraction. Her mother had told her once, during the hardest year of building the business, when the money was short and the hours were long, and Miriam had called her on a Wednesday night to say she wasn't sure she could keep going. The worst thing you can do to yourself when something is breaking is stop building. Because when the breaking is over, you need something to stand in. She kept building. At Sunday dinner with Raymond's family, his mother asked how business was going, and Miriam told her honestly that it was going very well, which was true, and had nothing to do with the rest of it. She meant both things simultaneously. The forensic accountant's name was Constance Adeyemi. She had been recommended by Miriam's attorney, Sylvia Cross, who described her in 4 words. She doesn't speculate. She documents. Sylvia said it the way she said everything that mattered, without decoration, as pure information. Constance arrived at Delaney Street at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, through the delivery entrance, before the kitchen staff came in. She carried a laptop bag and a leather folder, and the particular composure of a woman who had spent 20 years looking at the places where money goes when people believe no one is watching. She had seen worse than this. She would document this the same way she had documented everything else. Completely and accurately. She sat at the work table in the back office. Miriam spread the access logs in front of her without commentary. Constance looked at them the way Miriam looked at a manifest. From the beginning. Without skipping. She asked 4 questions. Miriam answered all 4 without hesitation. Then Constance opened her laptop and began working, and Miriam went to the front kitchen and began her own morning work, and they occupied the building together in parallel silence for 2.5 hours. When Constance appeared in the kitchen doorway, she said simply, "Come look at this." Miriam dried her hands. She followed her to the back office. She sat down across from Constance and looked at the screen. Constance walked her through it without editorializing, because that was how Constance worked, and it was exactly what Miriam needed. It had started 22 months ago. Not 14 months, the way Miriam had estimated when she first began to suspect. 22. 8 months earlier than she had calculated. And when Constance showed her the timeline on the screen, Miriam looked at those additional 8 months, and understood immediately what they represented. That was when her mother was sick. That was when she had been driving 2 hours each way on weekends to sit in a hospital room. When she had been managing the full operation during the week, and spending every Saturday and Sunday in a chair beside her mother's bed, holding her hand and reading to her, and doing the particular labor of loving someone through something terrible. When she had been, by every possible measure, fully occupied elsewhere. They had chosen that window. Deliberately. With patience. Constance did not say this. She simply showed the timeline. She let the dates speak. Miriam looked at them. The transfers ran through a procurement account Raymond administered. Small at first, calibrated with care to fall beneath the threshold that generated automatic review flags. Someone had thought about the increments. Someone had understood the system well enough to know exactly how much could move without triggering scrutiny, and had stayed just beneath that number for the first 6 months before gradually increasing the amounts as confidence grew. The vendor account was registered under the name Linwood Culinary Partners. No website. No physical location. A mailbox on the east side of the city. Constance turned her laptop and showed Miriam the business registration document. Claudette's signature was at the bottom. Not Raymond's. Claudette's. Miriam looked at the document for a long time. She looked at her sister's handwriting, The signature she had seen on birthday cards and Christmas envelopes, and the lease agreement for Claudette's first apartment, which Miriam had co-signed because Claudette's credit wasn't established yet, and Miriam had wanted to help her get started. She thought about the morning the Delaney Street lease was signed. Claudette had cried. Real tears, the kind that come before you decide whether to cry, not after. She had hugged Miriam and said she was so proud of her, and Miriam had believed it because it had looked exactly like the truth. Maybe it had been the truth then. Maybe true things could be converted into something else so gradually that the conversion happened beneath the threshold of anyone's notice. The same way the transfers had moved. Small increments. Over a long time. Until one day you looked at the total, and could not find the moment it became what it was. How much? Miriam asked. Constance wrote the number on a notepad and turned it around. Miriam looked at it. It was the cost of the Delaney Street kitchen build-out. Nearly exactly. The number she had assembled over 3 years of deferred salary, and equipment she had leased instead of bought, and weekends she had worked instead of rested. The foundation of everything that came after. They had taken the foundation from her. In patience and in paper, while she was looking elsewhere. She set the notepad down. Is every transfer documented? Every one, Constance said. Raymond's involvement? His signatures appear on 3 budget approval documents that cleared the transfer windows for larger amounts. He either understood what he was approving or he was not doing his job. He understood, Miriam said. Constance closed her laptop. Miriam called Sylvia from the parking lot. For sentences. The summary of what Constance had found, the timeline, the total, and what she wanted to do about it. Sylvia listened without interrupting. Then she said, How do you want to proceed? All of it, Miriam said. Civil and criminal and divorce. And I want it filed before they know it's coming. I'll start today, Sylvia said. Miriam hung up. She sat in the parking lot for a moment. The morning was gray and the street was beginning to fill with the ordinary Tuesday traffic of people going to work and running errands, and moving through their days without any knowledge of what was happening in this parking lot. Then she went back inside. The Harmon Group menu needed finalizing before noon. She finalized it. She called her cousin Adiz on a Thursday evening from the kitchen parking lot, after the last staff member had gone home. Adiz was 47 and had spent 20 years as a hospital administrator, which had given her a particular capacity for remaining functional inside terrible situations. She was the person Miriam called when she needed someone who would not fall apart. She picked up on the second ring. I need to ask you something, Miriam said. And I need you to tell me everything. Not just what you think I can carry. A silence that was not empty. Okay, Adiz said. Raymond and Claudette. The silence changed. It became heavier and more specific. The silence of someone who has been waiting for a particular conversation, and is now inside it. How long have you known? Miriam asked. I didn't know, Adiz said carefully. I suspected. About 5 months ago I saw something I couldn't explain, and I made myself explain it charitably, because I was afraid of what I would have to do if I didn't. What did you see? Adiz told her. Quietly, without embellishment. The way you describe something you have been carrying for months, and are finally setting down somewhere. Miriam listened to all of it without interrupting. Is there anything else? A pause. Raymond asked Bernard a question. Maybe 2 months ago. About what happens to a business when a marriage ends. How assets get divided when one spouse built the business before the marriage, and the other joined it later. Adiz's voice had dropped. Bernard thought it was hypothetical. He mentioned it to me that same evening and I thought about calling you and I didn't. You're calling me now. Miriam, I should have. You're calling me now, Miriam said again. Not as comfort. As fact. That's what I have. That's what I'm working with. She asked one more question. Adiz answered it. Then neither of them spoke for a moment. He thought he could take it, Adiz said finally. The business. The clients. The whole thing. He thought he could just. He didn't think of it as taking, Miriam said. She looked at the brick wall across the parking lot. The streetlight above it buzzed faintly in the evening air. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. He thought of it as getting his portion. He convinced himself there was a portion that belonged to him. He'd been inside this thing long enough that he confused proximity with ownership. She paused. He never built anything. So he doesn't know what it feels like to build something. He just looked at what I had and did the math. Adiz was quiet. Stay close, Miriam said. I'm going to need you in a few weeks. She hung up. She sat in the parking lot until she was ready. Then she started the car and drove back to the office because there was a vendor invoice that needed to be coded before the end of the billing cycle, and she had told herself she would finish it tonight. She finished it. She drove home. The morning of the conference room meeting, Miriam arrived at Delaney Street at 5:45. She moved through the kitchen the way she always moved through the kitchen, beginning to end, checking each station, each temperature log, each element of an operation she had built and knew completely. She cut sweet plantains for the staff breakfast she left in the warmer every morning, a habit she had started in year 2 after she tested her mother's theory, that people who begin their day having been fed do better work. The theory had proven true. She kept the habit. She sliced the plantains with the confidence of 10,000 repetitions. She plated them. She covered them with foil. She set them in the warmer. Then she took off her apron. She hung it on its hook. She walked to the conference room and arranged the chairs. Her mother arrived first. Miriam Okafor was 71 years old and had decided somewhere in her late 40s that she was finished apologizing for the space she required. She came through the delivery entrance because Miriam had told her to, without asking why, because she had raised a daughter who did not give unnecessary instructions. She was carrying a covered ceramic pot. Pepper soup, made the evening before and reheated that morning and wrapped in a kitchen towel for transport. The way she transported everything that mattered. Carefully, without making a production of the care. She set it on the back counter. She looked through the glass partition at the conference room, at the chairs arranged and the projector positioned, and her daughter standing at the head of the table. She looked at Miriam the way she had always looked at her. Completely. Then she went in and sat where Miriam directed her and folded her hands on the table, and waited with the patience of a woman who understood that clarity comes in its own time, and the only dignified response is to be present when it arrives. Sylvia and Constance arrived together. Adiz came in alone and sat in the corner near the window, pressing her lips together once when she read the room, and then going still. Claudette arrived 3 minutes past 9 and swept the room in a single glance. Her eyes moved from Sylvia to Constance to Adiz in the corner to her mother at the table, and something that had been sitting loosely in her expression tightened. Not into guilt. Into calculation. She was already deciding, Miriam could see it, which version of herself to be in this room. She sat down. She placed her phone on the table face down, the gesture of someone making their hands visibly empty. Raymond came in 2 minutes later with the unremarkable energy of a man who had not yet understood what kind of room he had entered. He nodded at the table generally. He pulled out a chair. He sat with the relaxed posture of a man who expected an ordinary meeting. His eyes found Miriam across the table. He smiled. She looked at him steadily for 1 moment. Then she said, "Constance, go ahead." Constance presented for 14 minutes. She used the projector. She displayed the transfer log in full, chronologically, each transaction dated and sourced and labeled. She displayed the Linwood Culinary Partners registration with Claudette's signature enlarged on the screen. She displayed the 3 budget approval documents bearing Raymond's signature, the ones that had cleared the transfer windows for the larger amounts. She displayed the 22-month timeline. Then she read the total figure aloud. The room held in a silence that had different textures depending on where you were sitting in it. Miriam Okafor was looking at Claudette. Not with fury. Miriam had expected fury. What she saw instead was something that lived beneath fury. In the deeper country of what it costs a woman to look at someone she carried and nursed and named and raised and not recognize what she is seeing. Her mother was looking at Claudette with grief. Pure, specific, structural grief. Raymond's face had moved through several expressions and settled on the one that had served him most reliably throughout his life. The reasonable man. Unfairly implicated. Ready to provide context. Claudette had not moved. Her hands were in her lap. Her jaw was set. She was finishing the calculation she had started when she walked in the door, and Miriam could see the moment she arrived at her answer. She looked at Miriam directly. I need you to hear me. Her voice was controlled. She had rehearsed this, Miriam could tell, had found the version that sounded like honesty rather than defense, had practiced the tone that walks the line between accountability and justification. I know what those numbers look like. I know what this room looks like. But you have never understood what it has been like to be the other person in this company. To give 11 years of my life to something with your name above the door, and have that be the entirety of what I am here. To do the work that makes clients feel something and watched you receive the credit because you own it. She let that sit. I'm not saying it was handled right. I'm saying I was desperate, and I was invisible, and I had been invisible for a long time. And Raymond saw me when you couldn't. The room was completely still. Miriam let it be still for 5 full seconds. She counted them the way she counted everything. Precisely. Then she spoke. I taught you how to run a client intake call, she said. Her voice was quiet and did not rise. I sat beside you for the first 4, and let you lead the 5th alone, because I wanted you to find out what you were capable of. I drove you to the supply house your first week, because you didn't know what you needed, and I wanted you to learn rather than struggle. I put you on a profit-sharing structure in year 3, because I wanted you to have something that was yours inside something that was ours. She paused. You were not invisible. You decided to become something else. And the difference between those two things is the only thing I need you to understand before we move forward. Her voice remained level. Exact. You will have to carry that difference. I can't carry it for you. Claudette looked at the table. Miriam turned to Raymond. He looked at her with the expression she had anticipated. The one that had been waiting its turn since Constance finished presenting. He leaned forward slightly, and his voice carried the weight of a man who genuinely believes the story he has constructed about himself. Miriam, we have been together for 13 years. You cannot reduce 13 years to. I have one question for you, Miriam said. He stopped. Did you approve those budget windows knowing what they were being used for? The silence that followed was its own answer. Raymond looked at the table. His jaw worked slightly. He looked back up at her. She nodded once. Then Sylvia has something to say. Nkechi stood up while Raymond was still processing what had just ended. She rose slowly, with the full and unhurried dignity of a woman who had fed her community from a church kitchen for 30 years, and buried her husband and raised 2 daughters by herself, and built a life that required no one's permission. She picked up her bag. She adjusted her wrapper. She straightened to her full height. She looked at Claudette. She did not look at Raymond. She did not look at the projector or the documents on the table, or the number that was still displayed on the screen. She looked at her daughter. She said her name. Just the name. The one she had chosen before Claudette was born. The one that meant something when she chose it. The one she had said 10,000 times in 10,000 registers, in correction and in celebration, and in the ordinary music of a shared life. She said it once, softly, in the voice of a woman setting something down that she can no longer carry to where the other person has gone. Then she walked out of the conference room. She did not take the ceramic pot of pepper soup from the back counter. She walked past it. She went through the delivery entrance the way she had come in, and the door swung shut behind her. And the kitchen was quiet in the particular way kitchens are quiet when someone essential has just left them. Nobody filled the silence she left. Nobody tried. After 10 full seconds, Sylvia opened her folder. She read without inflection. The way a person reads when they understand that the words are doing the work in decoration would only diminish them. The civil suit had been filed the previous afternoon. The forensic report was attached in full as primary documentation. Every transfer, every approval signature, every registration document included and sourced. The criminal referral had been submitted to the Financial Crimes Unit that morning. Constance's report accompanied it. Claudette's employment was terminated, effective today. The formal notice was prepared, and would be served before the end of the morning. Raymond's access to all company systems had been revoked at 6 a.m. The divorce petition had been filed at the same time. The hotel group and the hospital network had both been notified in writing that Miriam was the sole primary contact for all matters going forward. Both had responded in writing confirming continued partnership without condition. Sylvia closed the folder. There is a civil suit, a criminal referral, And a divorce proceeding, she said. Those are the terms. There is no negotiated exit. There is no parallel conversation. She folded her hands on the table. She was done. They left separately. Raymond went first through the front entrance. He left without his jacket. He left without his coffee. He left without the posture he had carried into the room. The ease of a man who believes the room is arranged in his favor. He walked out like something from which the current had been cut. Claudette left 8 minutes later through the side door. She walked through the main kitchen on her way out, past the prep stations and the equipment and the warmer where the plantains sat covered in foil, made that morning by her sister the way they were made every morning. She did not stop. The door closed. Adie stayed. She sat beside Miriam at the conference room table after the others had gone and didn't speak for a while, which was exactly right. Some silences are not empty. Some silences are the most honest thing two people can offer each other. You okay? She finally asked. Miriam considered it genuinely, without performance. Not yet, she said. But I know what okay looks like from here. I've rebuilt before. I know what it requires. Adie's put her hand over Miriam's and held it for a moment. Then she left. Miriam sat alone in the conference room. She looked at the empty chairs, at the projector still glowing against the wall, at the number Constance had displayed, the cost of her own kitchen, taken from her in patience and in silence while she was busy building everything around it. She looked at it without flinching. Then she stood up. She turned off the projector. She walked to the back counter and lifted the ceramic pot her mother had left. She put it in the refrigerator. She was not going to waste it. She went back to work. 14 months. That was how long it took for the legal proceedings to resolve, for the accounts to be fully restored, for the company to finish absorbing the disruption and emerge on the other side of it steadier than it had been before. Not despite what had happened, because of what it had required her to build in response. Miriam stood at the head of the conference room table on a Tuesday morning in late October with a pen in her hand, and the hotel group contract open in front of her. 43 pages. She had read all of them twice. She had negotiated 3 clauses to her satisfaction before signing anything. She pressed the pen to the signature line and signed her name. Her director of operations, Renata, witnessed it. Beside her sat the new procurement manager, a methodical and careful man who had caught a double billing error from a linen supplier in his 3rd week, documented it without fanfare, and shown Miriam the paperwork. He was exactly what the role required. Priya, who had grown into her title and then grown past it, and was already being considered for something larger, stood near the window and smiled when the pen came off the page. The room was quiet in the particular way that follows the completion of something that required a great deal to become possible. Miriam set down the pen. She looked at the wall where her mother's photograph hung in its frame. The green apron, the crossed arms, the expression that said, "I am not posing. I am working. You happen to be standing there." She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at the contract. Her name at the bottom. Her company's name at the top. She thought about her mother driving the nail into the church kitchen wall for the very first photograph. She thought about the borrowed pot and the cashier's check and the Tuesday she had cried in her car and gone back inside anyway. She thought about 22 months of transfers moving in small, patient increments while she was looking elsewhere, and the 14 months of rebuilding that had followed, and the morning she had stood in a coat closet and decided what kind of woman she was going to be. She had been that woman. She was still that woman. Her mother came to the kitchen on a Tuesday in November. She came through the front door this time, in the late morning, wearing her blue dress and carrying her good leather bag. She had not called ahead. Miriam saw her cross the kitchen floor and went to her. They held each other in the middle of the main prep room, in the warmth and noise of a full operation running well, and her mother patted her back the short, repeated way she had always done. The gesture that said, "I see you and you are still here," and asked nothing else of either of them. Then her mother pulled back and looked at her face. "Show me," she said. So Miriam showed her everything. She walked her through the full kitchen, every station, the new prep layout, the cold storage reorganization, the digital manifest system, the staff training board with each team member's current certification progress marked in blue and green. Her mother walked beside her, and asked the practical questions of a woman who had run a kitchen herself, and knew which questions revealed whether something was actually working or only appearing to. She checked the temperature log on the walk-in and nodded. She touched the edge of a prep counter and looked at the welding. She watched two of the junior staff work through a plating sequence together and said nothing, which was its own form of approval. At the end they stood in the main kitchen, in the ordinary mid-morning light of a Tuesday in November, and Nkechi looked around the space with the expression from the photograph. Not smiling. Seeing it. Taking it in completely. Your father would have wanted to see this, she said quietly. Miriam looked at her mother. She felt something move through her, not grief exactly, but what grief becomes when it has been given enough time and enough work. Something heavier than pride and quieter than peace. Something she did not have a precise word for, and did not need one. I built it for people like him, she said. People who didn't get to see theirs. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. She took Miriam's hand and held it. Just that. No words. No instruction. Just the hand of the woman who had shown her what it looked like to build something real, and keep it real and never stop. Then she said she needed to be at her church committee before 1, kissed her daughter on the cheek, and walked out the front door into the November morning. That evening, after close, Miriam sat at the work table in the back kitchen with her mother's recipe binder open in front of her, and a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. The binder was wearing out the honest way. The plastic sleeves clouded. Several index cards rewritten when the originals became illegible. The binding repaired twice with the same tape her mother used for everything that needed holding together. She turned the pages slowly. Her mother's handwriting ran across each card in the compact, efficient script of someone who wrote to record, not to be admired. This one doubles without losing itself. Trust the process even when it looks wrong in the middle. Start with more than you think you need. You can always reduce. You cannot add back what you've already lost. The second day is always better. Whatever you're making, it needs time to become what it's supposed to be. Miriam looked at the last one for a long time. She thought about what had been made here. What had survived and what had not. What had been taken in patience and rebuilt in something stronger than patience. She thought about the morning she had stood in the coat closet with the second phone in her hand. And she thought about this morning, with the pen in her hand and the contract signed, and she thought about everything in between. The second day is always better. She closed the binder. She checked the temperature logs one final time. She verified the locks. She turned off the station lights one by one, beginning at the back, moving toward the front. The same sequence she had followed every evening since the day she signed the Delaney Street lease. When the last light went off, she stood for a moment in the dark of her own kitchen. The equipment hummed. The refrigeration ran its low, steady cycle. The street outside glowed through the front window, and the sign above the door held the light the way it always held it. Her name. Her company. Her building. She picked up her bag. She walked out the front door. She locked it behind her. The work would be there in the morning. She would be there before it needed her. She always was. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I've already chosen 2 more stories for you. They're waiting right now.